This morning, we wanted to talk about I don't even know how to phrase this. It's just
Well,
the
just
depressing,
yeah.
the sad,
Just
the
name the video, bro. Just name it.
okay. I don't know how to like describe our feelings about it before we get into it.
It's not all bad. It's not all bad.
Okay, yeah. I guess it. Hassan's right. I'm being a very strong pessimist here.
Yeah.
Because the only thing I happened to know about that they were talking about happened to be the part where they did terrible in. So it's kind of one of those things where you overemphasize the part that you know about. Oh, I mean, I thought Swan, his video wasn't terrible. I actually think it's one of the better ones. I thought Jimmy's and Trent's, they had some huge problems with their videos. But I mean, I think the big the vast majority of the responses from Catholics to Gavin's video and icons have been a bit lackluster. And I think if you add some nuance to the discussion, that we will be able to uh, not really be shaken by it at all. Honestly, I am as shaken by the lack of universal icon veneration among the uh, first three, four, five, 3, 4, 5 centuries of Christians as I am by the lack of mitre usage among that era of Christians. I really don't think it's that huge of a deal um, that this
Yeah.
didn't materialize in a universal sense during that time. And we're going to get into a little bit of the principles of why that's the case. But Son, did you have any general comments to make?
I mean, it's like what you've got to think about is like the unity of the legs credendi, legs orandi, and legs vivendi means that as as conceptual data is derived from the same object of the deposit of revelation, you get a development necessarily in things that reflect new conceptual discoveries, new conceptual derivations, conclusions, right? And so that's what you're going to get in terms of worship practices and in terms of like moral customs, right? So moral custom is going to develop, or what moral customs ought to develop, will be better understood through the better understanding of the unity of the three aspects of theology.
Yeah, I think the general place that this discussion needs to go into is specifically how devotional and liturgical practices relate to underlying teaching of the church. Is something I think a perfect example of this would be debates surrounding like the Sacred Heart devotion. Is the Sacred Heart devotion do, in order to justify our usage of that specific devotion form that's used universally in the Latin Rite, something which has been stamped with approval by the Roman Church. Do we need to prove that it is an apostolic practice? I think everybody would recognize, and I think even like Eastern Orthodox and Protestants would recognize, like, yeah, of course, we don't need to um, prove that these specific devotional and liturgical practices were present and practiced throughout the entire history of the church in the same way. Like everybody would recognize that that would be kind of a ridiculous demand to make. I mean, everybody except like the insane regulative principle Puritan types would recognize this as clearly being not the case. But on the other hand, what we do need to prove and what we do need to justify is we need to justify that the theological principles are conceptually present in the revealed data. And then this gets into arguments from the arguments from Revelation, really, from the specific writings of the apostles. That's called the New Testament, and also from the the unwritten traditions of the apostolic teaching. So it this really isn't a huge deal. And actually, if you look at something, and the reason I specifically use the example of miters is actually miters. And if you guys don't know, because somebody did ask me about what miters were when I was discussing this yesterday, miters are the hats that bishops wear. And that is a certain representation actually of their teaching office and of standing in the place of Christ in a in most of their teaching function. Actually, at least from what I have heard explained to me from the history of miters. But when it comes to the history of their implementation of specific hats that bishops would wear to distinguish them from the rest, from laymen, and then also eventually from the from other clerics in their specific teaching function, was I have seen actually that this practice did come from the pagans, and you get specific fathers who actually condemn the usage of miters amongst the pagans. An example is Saint Augustine on the City of God. If I had a professor one time comment that he was reading, a Protestant professor, reading City of God one time, and he came across this passage on Augustine making fun of the miters of all of the pagan priests. He was making fun of them, how stupid they looked with all of their miters, and then he decided to. And then he just looked to the front cover, and it was a picture of Augustine wearing a mitre, because Augustine was a bishop. So you can have specific liturgical practices which are really completely reversed, while also keeping the same underlying doctrinal principles. And I think this is actually something which should be recognized from the history of Protestant liturgy, is what you have in the first generation. So I'm gonna challenge at least the classical forms of Protestants to be consistent on this one. What you have in the first generation of Luther's liturgy, his liturgy of the canon of the Mass, was basically completely stripped down to the words of institution. And then over time, throughout the ages, as you get further away from the Reformation, the liturgy of the Lutherans begins to look a lot more Roman. Now, this happens in theologically conservative Lutheran circles. The Lutherans don't believe anything different than they did believe in the at least in the confessional era of Lutheranism. So why was there this almost complete reversal to being almost as far away from Rome as you can in basic liturgical practice, to going towards looking like the Romans a lot? Well, the reason is they would say in the first generation, they didn't want they wanted the people to be able to sharply distinguish from what they would call the idolatry of the papacy, or the idolatry of the papists in certain things like the sacrifice of the Mass. So they wanted to sharply distinguish what they were doing from what Rome was doing over all of these over various generations. But the thing is, as you get further away from the Reformation, and as you get people who are maybe the great grandchildren of these people, and sometimes in some areas, such as American Lutheranism, you don't even get people who are interacting with Roman Catholics at all. It's not as necessary to sharply distinguish yourself from Roman Catholics. So now apply this to the Apostolic era. What did you have? What was the situation that the first generation, or second generation, or third generation of the church was dealing with when it was majority pagan? They really were dealing with a type of popular worship that was very blatantly attached to material representation. So obviously, you're going to be very, very, very tempered with how you're going to use things like imagery. You're going to be very, very tempered about these things, as not to have the people who might have grown up like this, or may have just grown up around people like this, you're going to want to make sure that they don't fall into these same errors. But as certain accidental situations change, you're going to be able to apply the law differently. And this is really how actually a lot of different liturgical developments happen over the history of the church. And again, even Protestants recognize this when it comes to the history of their own liturgical developments. Why was Calvin's Geneva like this? Where they didn't even use anything besides they're really exclusive psalmists. They didn't use anything besides the Psalter a cappella. Why was it like that then? But now, when you go to most even conservative Reformed churches, you get looked at weird if you were a exclusive psalmody a cappella guy. Well, the accidental circumstances of your situation change. Therefore, the liturgical law is applied differently. So, really, for the most part, this discussion almost has nothing to do. It does a little bit, and I think we can recognize in certain ways, as Hassan has pointed out, that this does have something to do with the development of doctrine, which underlies the application of the liturgical law. But even without much development, we can recognize that it's more so the case of really accidental circumstances in situational in the situation changing for the fact that the application of the law has changed. So does that seem like a good sort of summary, Hassan?
Yeah, I think so. And then that really brings us to what we discussed really early on about this, which is that there is a proposition by some people based upon um, legendary information that, and also based upon the opinion of the fathers at Nicaea too, that not only is this a homologous change, but it's not really so much a change so much as it is a practice that already existed becoming more widespread. So they talk about
Mm-hmm.
it as like the deposit of the apostles and their derivation of like conceptually present like data within the uh, deposit of revelation already included veneration of icons, and that this spread, right? It spread from an apostolic matrix throughout the rest of the church, and it wasn't taken up immediately, but it spread, right? And they do acknowledge that like the veneration of icons like became more widespread and became more overt and more ornate, but they don't acknowledge that it is a passage from not doing it to doing it, right? Whereas we would disagree with the council fathers, and we would disagree with some of the EOs and a small minority of Catholics who actually think that things like the story of the image of Edessa are real and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So
You
but
continue.
but but crucially, it doesn't matter, right? Which is what we agreed upon. It doesn't matter. The primary argument is whether or not it is not a heterologous change, whether or not it is a transformation of what was received, or merely a progress of conceptual derivation. And as I was saying before, the integral unity of the lex credendi, lex orandi, and lex vivendi, whether or not this further development of what was conceptually present in the lex credendi would lead to a homologous change in the lex orandi and the lex vivendi of the church. Hence the moral obligation not to be opposed to the kissing of the icons, and hence the use of the icons in worship widespread throughout the entire church. Um, and so this is what's really going on, is that there is a parallel development of prayer and worship and life next to the development of doctrine. And so this is the point. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter whether or not it was whether or not it was explicitly known, so long as it is not a heterologous development. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I actually meant to because brought up a common disposition towards those who would think likewise about like the story of Edessa. I think honestly, I think this is going to be huge because as we've seen with some of the responses to this, you see that Craig Truglia, the Eastern Orthodox, and the other Paul, who we all obviously know, that those two have actually kind of kind of paired up to fight paired up to fight the Catholics. I know weird sort of uh, how do I put it? Team right there to fight the Catholics, Orthodox versus Protestant. But what they're saying is that that our view on this is basically one big cope, and then on the one side, Truglia is going to be like, okay, all the historical scholarship is basically bunk and it's all stupid. And then Paul's going to say, well, all the historical scholarship is correct, but they're both going to agree that we're wrong on sort of our view of the application of liturgical law and development. Both ideas, I think, which are basically common sense, and we find examples of this within Protestantism. But basically, you're going to get this disposition right here from YVF, that consensus on historical scholarship does not determine the truth, higher criticism. So they're going to view us as essentially liberals for how we are supporting how we're kind of taking the common narrative as they'll think they'll think we're conceding to Babylon by not holding to that Luke painted the first icon and such and so forth. So how would you think about this, Hassan? Because you've thought about this a lot more than me.
What part of it?
Well, the fact that us making these concessions to some common narratives of the development of certain liturgical practices and beliefs is not just a big old concession to liberal scholarship, and that where on the other hand you have the base trad and conservative Eastern Orthodox who are actually holding what our holy fathers at Nicaea II held to.
Well, this we talked about this earlier. This is part of what Father Thomas Joseph White in his The Light of Christ calls a facile credulousness. And this goes beyond taking the church as an infallible rule of faith and taking the church as an authoritative teacher when she teaches fallibly. It goes beyond this, and it treats something as just because it is received, it must be true, because otherwise somebody begins to treat intrinsic arguments as necessary for a modally supernatural assent to propositions. And this is why, as we were saying, the flip side of the excessive the sort of like excessive credulousness is a sort of radical skepticism, an excessive skepticism. And they kind of coincide, just like all failures to adhere to a via media do, where, for example, somebody who is very prideful often is insecure. So they have something that goes off of the mean of humility, right? In both directions. Usually a vice is a failure in both directions to adhere to the mean. And it's not coherent, but no sin is coherent, right? So in the same way, this kind of like strange credulousness comes alongside an insistence that there must be as many intrinsic arguments as there can be for a doctrine. Any sort of possibility that the intrinsic arguments are not very good kind of like harms somebody's sense of that they can cling to the faith, because the reason by which they cling to the faith are the intrinsic arguments and not the extrinsic authority of God revealing, as proposed by the secondary authority of the church proposing.
Yeah, exactly. So these people are stuck in this sort of loop because they feel the need to justify intrinsically that something is true. So because of this incessant insecurity about the truth of the faith, they'll accept anything that they can get. Really, they'll put forward anything they can get their hands on, even if it isn't something that is too convincing. And this is a vice that we see very very commonly. So we have to uh, be honest. On the one hand, we have to be honest with the evidence, and on the other hand, we have to put forward a reasonable explanation for the evidence that doesn't contradict anything that the church has taught. But I can hear the objection right now, Hassan, and I know you've done some study into some of the documents surrounding Nicaea too, but I can hear the objection that, well, Nicaea too clearly they clearly believed, and they write about in the council documents, that this was the practice of the apostles and the universal practice of the early church. Now we can have some certitude that this was not the universal practice of the early church. So how would you exactly respond to the argument? Because the objector is going to say, well, either you have to accept. Actually, there's a fun little chart about this. While you explain that, I'll pull up the chart in order to illustrate.
So this is very important. It's good that we're getting onto this, but the way that the magisterium works is that what is formally asserted has to be believed, right? What is formally asserted has to be believed. If it's formally asserted definitively, it has to be believed with the assent of faith. And if it's formally asserted otherwise, then it must be assented to with submission of will and intellect. Now, at the same time, when you look at something like the council using something as part of its rationale, you have to look at if this is actually the core argument. But it's not the core argument. It's illustrative, right? It's an attempt to illustrate that that the conceptual derivation is not foreign to the actual object, such that there is a transformation. The actual argument is just that there is no transformation. And Nicaea 2 makes two fundamental arguments. I was talking to Christian about this earlier. The two fundamental arguments of Nicaea 2 are, first, that the sort of like philosophical argument they draw about honoring an image is only a redounding of honor from the image to the imaged. Okay, that's fine. But the fundamental argument that they're making is not about this. It's ecclesiological, because Isaiah 42 and other texts, and this is recorded in the Acts, which you can read from Father Richard Price, the council fathers are very clear that since the Old Testament prophesizes that Christ would defeat idolatry and would remove idolatry from the Christians, it cannot be that not only will individual Christians be committing idolatry, but there would be an institutional, widespread, and universal acceptance of an idolatrous practice. If this was the case, it would mean that the church had become idolatrous formally. It would mean that she would have a materially idolatrous action as part of her rites. And if this was the case, then we would be waging war against the prophecy of Scripture itself. And so the main principle underlying the whole of Nicaea 2 is an outrage against the Robber Council, where the Robber Council has said effectively that the prophecies of Christ do not apply to the church in the manner in which Scripture says that they apply. And this, by the way, this ecclesiological argument is used for centuries and centuries in the church. Auctorem Fidei and the Council of Trent use the same principle when they state explicitly that something cannot be intrinsically harmful if it's promulgated in the Roman liturgy. And this comes from the principle that anything which God does not approve in worship is materially idolatrous, at least, right?
Yeah.
Christian made this point before. Islamic prayers, even when the content is not false, are materially idolatrous insofar as they depend upon claiming that they are approved by a divine authority when they are not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anything which is materially idolatrous, any kind of worship unapproved by God is materially idolatrous. Any kind of worship which is intrinsically harmful to the faithful cannot be approved by God, and therefore must be materially idolatrous. And so the church is incapable of worshipping as a whole body in a materially idolatrous fashion. Otherwise, we destroy the prophecies of Scripture. And so image veneration is kind of like negatively proven in this way to be something that cannot be idolatrous because it would mean that Scripture is disproven. However, this argument obviously doesn't really work for Protestants. It only works for people who conceded certain ecclesiological doctrines about the church's corporate infallibility at the time. So the council's argument doesn't really stand for people who are gonna, for people who are gonna be objecting to the more core principle.
Yeah, that we have to be. I think we have to be very careful. Even so, you've already said that this is a secondary argument of the council. We have to be very clear about what exactly is defined within documents. Like this comes up in Pope Leo the 13th's writing against apostolic orders. Apostolic Anglican orders. So when we look at all of the arguments that Leo the 13th has given, if we think that the arguments are bad, it's entirely possible that we would. Obviously, we wouldn't hastily just say like, "Oh, Holy Father, you do not know what you're talking about, and you make bad arguments." If we think that that an argument doesn't have merit, or that it's or that there's an issue with one of the premises of the argument, that is not what is being formally defined by the document. What is being formally defined by the document is the conclusion. The arguments within the document they're really accidental. If Pope Leo wanted to just come out and just write Anglican orders are invalid, he could have just said that and then sent it out, and everybody would have to assent to that. But I mean, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to give certain reasons for his conclusion. So what we have to assent to in Nicaea too isn't some particular argument on its own. What we have to primarily assent to is that which is formally defined. So the fact that the apostles venerated icons is not something which is formally defined in the documents. So really, this image is a bit disingenuous when it says contradicts Nicaea 2. Well, what do you mean by contradict Nicaea 2? Do you mean materially contradict one of the documents in one of the secondary arguments it gives? Well, I guess, yeah, we're contradicting Nicaea 2 in that case. Do you mean formally contradict that which is defined? No. If you formally contradict that which is defined, you're a heretic, and you don't have the faith. So yeah, that's really what's the problem here. That, and by development. One, I don't think any of these guys really know what development means, because if you didn't have development, and this is being really just blunt, but if you didn't have any development, all you would be able to do would be republish copies of the Bible, because development either involves in one case the so-called nominal development, or it's called first order development by Father Sola. That is clarifying that which is said. So it'd be like going from Hassan is a man to Hassan is a rational animal. Those two propositions, they actually aren't even conceptually distinct. You're just going from the statement of what something is to the definition of what something is. There's actually no development there. Really, in the sense, there is development there is what I meant, but there's no
Right.
development from one concept to another. And then the second degree of development is going to be going into what is conceptually present already in the thing. So if you're going to oppose development as on principle, then really you're not going to be able to go from the revealed data. You're not going to even be able to clarify your statements, because any sort of change, whether nominal or so-called virtual or conceptual, however, nominal or conceptual, I'll use that language, first order or second order. If you want to learn about this, check out the series that I've started on the evolution of Catholic dogma. I explain this, but whether first order or second order, it's still within the framework of our develop. So it's not whether you believe in development of doctrine; it's what kind of development of doctrine you believe in. And even then, I don't think most of these people, if you explain terms correctly, would have any sort of problem. So again, that's also a bit disingenuous to pull up development of doctrine on here, considering everybody believes in it.
I mean, I'm gonna be. Let me make 2 points about this. First of all, most people have an unfair version of the concept of development of doctrine in our teachings, mostly because people associate it too heavily with Newman, as you have said yourself. Yes. And secondly, because the version of it that's being taught on the internet is wrong. There are major errors with the way that doctrinal development is being expressed on the internet, right? The way that people are receiving it has nothing to do, in many ways, with the traditional concept. Some people don't understand how theological sources work, so they have no idea how the conceptual derivations are made, right? And they err. For example, when somebody tries to claim, I won't name him because we've already named him, that the ceremonies changing in the Old Testament is an example of doctrinal development. No, it's just wrong. It shows that somebody has no idea of what the concept is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second issue that people have is that straying straightforwardly into modernism without knowing what the boundary between development of dogma and the modernist transformist thesis is, right? And there is a second point that I wanted to make, which is that the fathers of Nicaea too were not ignorant of development of doctrine as a concept, nor did they reject it. The whole church had already accepted conceptually what St. Vincent of Lérins is talking about in the Commonitorium, which is that of ages upon ages in the church, there is a derivation of further conceptual conclusions.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna pull up that quote that Vatican I brings up real quick, because this was taught since the time of St. Vincent. This isn't anything new in the church, and really somebody who was only interacted with Newman, and really I think some of these people haven't interacted with Newman, because what I've seen this in Father Lagrange and Father Sola is when they're writing about Newman, they're like, yes, obviously, great, brilliant. He wrote a very profound work on this, but there's terminological issues. There's a few conceptual issues, and if you're not properly trained in a sort of section of a dogmatic work, such as the STS also has a section on this that I've read. Father Hunter, he has a section on this. A lot of people have sections on this. If you haven't already been properly trained and you just jump into the essay and think that is the only and definitive work on this matter, you're going to get some issues. And why is this? Well, you have to recognize Newman wasn't even Catholic when he wrote the essay. One, he wasn't even Catholic when he wrote the essay, and two, he hadn't really done his major interaction during his time at Rome under Perone. He hadn't done his major interaction with Roman dogmatics yet. You get that in his where is it? Don't have it on my desk. Don't know where it is. In his essay on the evolution of Catholic dogma, he actually has done a lot more interaction, specifically with Suarez, which Suarez is his own issues. But he has a lot more of a precise understanding of it. And this was just, I think, 2 or 3 years after he wrote his essay that the Perron-Newman letters were written. So what you have is these modern Catholic apologists who have kind of gotten just normie narrative surrounding what development is. They're really not trained in logic, which logic is going to be the most important discipline to understand what is going on. And they might have read the essay on the development of doctrine. They probably haven't read the Newman-Perron letters. They probably haven't read any other treatments. Definitely not Father Sola's treatment or anything in De Revelatione from Father Lagrange. So you get them saying things like that the change from the ceremonial law of the Old Testament to the New Testament is the development of doctrine. Where do you get that? Because this is what Vatican I, how Vatican I describes it. May understanding, knowledge, and wisdom increase as ages and centuries roll along, and greatly and vigorously flourish in each and in all, in the individual and the whole church, but this only in its own proper kind. That is to say, in the same doctrine, in the same sense, in the same understanding. So, do you not believe there was some sort of? Do you not believe in the New Covenant revelation? Is that what you're telling me? That, and there's issues even then with viewing the Old Covenant as the same as the New Covenant. Is that what you're telling me? Is that the New Covenant is merely some sort of conceptual development upon the Old Covenant? Did grace and truth not come with our Lord Jesus Christ? There's an infinite amount of issues. Obviously, there's not an infinite amount of there's too many issues to even talk about with describing the change from the ceremonial law of the old to the new as a development. But that's not even what I'm upset about, really. What I'm upset about is the fact that people are going to listen to this, and they're going to use this example when they're talking, because I know what's going to happen, and this is going to happen all the time. People are going to listen to that. They're going to hear that. They're going to think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to go out there. They're going to talk to Protestants. They're going to talk to Orthodox, and they're going to tell them, hey, guys, this is an example of doctrinal development. Therefore, you should believe in it. So what everybody thinks now is that there is some sort of objective evolution in a sort of continual revelation through the Roman magisterium, as there was between the Old and New Covenants. That's what they're going to believe. It's damaging not only to the faith of the individual hearing it, but it's also damaging to the witness of the Catholic faith to other people. And people need to stop. People need to stop talking about stuff they don't understand. It really is damaging. What I liked, and I wanted to compliment Swan on this. If you listened, if anybody listened to his presentation, and I think this is a good analogy, and I'm going to kind of tweak it a bit to how I think it should be more clear. And I'll talk to Swan later what he thinks about this as a bit of an editing to his analogy. But he talks about it like the Polaroid. Polaroid, you kind of have it, and it clears up over time to get your picture. Now, really, what the Polaroid is in this analogy, the Polaroid is the concept as existing in the intellect, and the thing which is pictured is the thing out there. I use the concept of the lens, like the divine revelation is kind of like that number chart you get at the doctors. And then they kind of flip the lenses in front of your eyes until you get 20/20 vision. Because really what you have to understand is the development's happening in here. It exists in the intellect. It exists subjectively with the foundation and the thing, but it exists subjectively. There is no objective development going on. There's no development in the revelation which is happening. It's the same revelation, but a increase in understanding in the church and in the individual, being able to draw forth what is already conceptually present in the same object. It's not like how we think of the natural sciences, where we actually learn things going on and going forth. It's like how we would think of metaphysics, where in metaphysics you have these first principles you start with, and all of your conclusions in this in metaphysics or logic, or really any of the philosophical disciplines, your conclusions are really what is drawn forth and drawn out of those first principles. And that's just not how the popular Catholic figures. That's not how they think of development. Unfortunately, or they wouldn't say that. Think about the ceremonial law. So if you have a proper understanding of development, as I've laid out, you're not really gonna fall for that error when it comes to the thinking about it in terms of the ceremonial law or anything like that.
To illustrate my earlier point about the reception of Vincent, the Byzantine liturgical life already enshrined Vincent specifically on account of his teaching on this topic at the time of Nicaea II. So there's my point. So the whole like mode development thing is really like
yeah, I actually in my series on development, I'm going to go over some of the patristic and then medieval treatments of this, because it's super crazy that that pop Orthodox figures say that the Orthodox don't believe in the development of doctrine, because you have specific places where the fathers and the medievals explicitly talk about this. This isn't like even something where we just go back, like say the chapter from St. Vincent, where he explicitly talks about this, and the Protestant translators give the chapter head as like the St. Vincent on the development of doctrine or something.
mm-hmm.
So it's absolutely crazy that that there's going to be this narrative that the Roman Catholics, that James White's good old narrative that John Henry Newman invented the development of doctrine after Vatican I, which talks about the development of doctrine in order to cope with the decree on papal infallibility. It's like ridiculous narratives like that, which everybody who has ever read anything about the essay on development will know that Newman actually wrote it decades before he was even Catholic. But besides even that fact, it's just completely false that nobody before Newman talked about the development of doctrine. They've talked about it for over 1,500 years at that point, explicitly in a lot of places. So it was a common locus to talk about. I'm assuming that would be covered in probably De Locis or maybe De Revelatione, either the tract on Revelation or the tract on Theological Places, where they would talk about the church's interaction with Revelation, and in relation to it would be in De Revelatione that they would discuss this. So it had already been a common like section in their systematic theology textbooks to talk about by the time of Newman. So it really is a crazy narrative that people are bringing forward about this issue, and it's easily the most misunderstood doctrine. So, Dende, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing
Can
fantastic.
you hear me?
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about that, Hassan, or do you just want to continue to other stuff?
Well, there's a bunch of stuff being asked in the chat, so I don't want to delay too much, and I can't really think of anything that's like substantially important that we discussed about this that hasn't been brought up already. Although if I went through like Swan's video in a bit more detail, I'll probably have more to say.